Susan Miller stood in her grandmother's dusty attic, wiping sweat from her forehead. The summer heat made the small space feel like an oven. Her grandmother, Karoline Miller, had passed away 2 months ago at the age of 86. Now it was up to Susan to clean out the old house before it was sold. So much stuff, Susan muttered to herself. Boxes were stacked from floor to ceiling. Some looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. Susan was 34 years old, with brown hair always tied back in a ponytail. She worked as a teacher at the local elementary school. She had always been close to her grandmother, Karoline, visiting her every Sunday for dinner until Karoline's health began to fail last year. Susan opened another cardboard box labeled Chicago, 1980s. Inside were stacks of old newspapers, notebooks, and photographs. Her grandmother had been a well-known journalist in Chicago for over 40 years. She had interviewed politicians, celebrities, and everyday people. Karoline was known for her tough questions and honest reporting. Susan flipped through the photographs without much interest at first. There were pictures of Chicago streets, political rallies, and community events. But then she stopped suddenly, her eyes wide with surprise. "That can't be right," she whispered. She was looking at a photograph of her grandmother standing next to a young man. They were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. The young man was unmistakable. It was Barack Obama. He looked much younger, maybe in his 20s, but Susan was certain it was him. She turned the photo over. On the back, in her grandmother's neat handwriting, was written, "Barry and me, June, 1987. The truth stays between us." Susan sat back on her heels, confused. Her grandmother had never mentioned knowing Obama. Not once. And what did she mean by, "the truth stays between us"? She dug deeper into the box and found more photos. Her grandmother and Obama at what looked like a community center. The two of them sitting at a desk, papers spread out between them. Obama speaking to a small crowd while Karoline stood nearby, taking notes. In one photo, they were at what appeared to be a birthday party. Karoline was cutting a cake while Obama watched, laughing. They looked comfortable together, like old friends. Susan's phone rang, startling her. It was her cousin Peter. "Hey, Pete," she answered. "You won't believe what I just found in Grandma's attic." "More old newspapers?" Peter asked with a laugh. "No," Susan said slowly. "Photos of Grandma with Barack Obama. Lots of them. From the 1980s. There was silence on the other end of the line. "Pete? Are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here," Peter said. "That's weird. She never mentioned knowing him." "Exactly," Susan exclaimed. "And there's something else. On the back of one photo she wrote, 'The truth stays between us.' What do you think that means?" "I have no idea," Peter said. "But it sounds mysterious." "Can you come over?" Susan asked. "I could use some help going through all this stuff anyway." Peter agreed and arrived an hour later. He was Susan's younger cousin, a tall man with a friendly face. He worked as a librarian and had always been interested in family history. Together they examined the photos and searched through the rest of the box. They found a small, leather-bound journal with Karoline's name embossed on the cover. "Should we read it?" Susan asked, feeling uncomfortable about invading her grandmother's privacy. "She's gone now," Peter said gently. "And if there's something important about these photos, maybe the journal will explain it." Susan nodded and opened the journal. The first entry was dated January 15, 1987. "Started a new assignment today," she read aloud. "Investigating community organizing efforts in Southside Chicago. Met an interesting young man named Barack Obama. He's smart, ambitious, says he wants to make real change. Heard that before, but something different about this one." Susan turned the pages, reading entries from the following weeks and months. According to the journal, Karoline had been assigned to write about community organizing efforts in Chicago. That's how she met Obama, who was working as a community organizer after graduating from Columbia University. "Listen to this," Susan said, reading from an entry dated March 10, 1987. "Barry opened up more today. Talked about his childhood, his time in Indonesia, his mother's work. Some details don't match what he told me last month. Could be nothing, but my reporter instincts are tingling. The journal entries continued, describing how Karoline and Obama became friends. She mentioned his intelligence and charisma, but also noted what she called inconsistencies in his stories. April 22, 1987, Susan read. Found newspaper clippings about Barry's father. Some facts don't line up with what Barry told me. Beginning to think he's creating a narrative for himself. Not lying exactly, but shaping his story. Need to decide what to do with this information. Peter leaned forward, fascinated. Grandma was investigating Obama. Seems like it, Susan said. But she never published anything about him, as far as I know. They continued reading. In May 1987, Karoline wrote about confronting Obama with the inconsistencies she had found. May 17, 1987. Met Barry at the coffee shop. Laid out everything I found. Expected anger, denial. Instead, he went quiet. Then he thanked me. Said no one had ever cared enough to call him out before. We talked for hours. He explained about feeling caught between worlds, not fully belonging anywhere. Sometimes changing details to fit in. I understand more now. Decided not to write the exposé. Some truths matter more than others. Susan and Peter looked at each other, surprised by what they were reading. Wow, Peter said. So she could have exposed him for, what, exaggerating his background? But she chose not to. Susan nodded slowly. And they stayed friends, apparently. Look at how many photos there are from after that confrontation. They found entries spanning years. Karoline mentioned occasional meetings with Barry, even as he went to Harvard Law School, and later entered politics. The last entry about him was from 2007, when he announced his presidential campaign. January 17, 2007. Barry called today. He's running for president. Asked if I still had my notes from our early conversations. I told him yes, but that they would stay in my attic. He laughed, relieved. Said I was the first person who saw through him, and that made me the first person who truly saw him. I'm proud of the man he's become. The inconsistencies of youth have given way to a hard-earned authenticity. That's the story that matters, though it's not one I'll ever publish. Susan closed the journal, feeling emotional. Her grandmother had kept this relationship private her entire life. She had known a future president before he was famous, had even uncovered potentially damaging information about him, but chose to become his confidant instead of his critic. Do you think we should tell someone about this? Peter asked. These journals could be valuable, historically speaking. Susan thought about it, remembering her grandmother's words. The truth stays between us. I think we need to learn more. First, Susan said finally, Grandma kept this secret for a reason. Before we do anything, I want to understand why. Peter nodded in agreement. So what's our next step? Susan looked at the photos spread out on the attic floor, her grandmother and a young Barack Obama, sharing a secret that had remained hidden for decades. We need to find the rest of Grandma's journals, she said. And then maybe we need to talk to Obama himself. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the attic window, Susan carefully packed the photos and journal back into the box. She had come to clean out her grandmother's house, but had instead uncovered a mystery that would change her life forever. What had Karoline really discovered about Obama all those years ago? And why had she chosen to keep it secret? Susan was determined to find out the truth no matter where it led. The next morning, Susan woke up early. She had barely slept. Her mind kept returning to the photos and journal she had found in her grandmother's attic. She made coffee and called in sick to work. This was more important than teaching fourth grade today. Peter arrived at 9 o'clock with breakfast sandwiches. I brought food, he said, holding up the paper bag. And I have news. They sat at Karoline's kitchen table. The house still felt like her grandmother's home, with its flowered curtains and old wooden furniture. I did some research last night, Peter said, taking a bite of his sandwich. Obama was definitely in Chicago during those years. He worked as a community organizer from 1985 to 1988, before he went to Harvard Law School. Susan nodded. That matches what Grandma wrote in her journal. I also found something else, Peter continued, pulling out his phone. Remember how Grandma kept all those storage boxes at my parents' house? I called my mom last night and asked about them. She said there are several boxes labeled journals in their basement. Susan's eyes widened. We need to see those boxes. After breakfast, they drove to Peter's parents' house. Aunt Linda, Peter's mother and Karoline's daughter-in-law, led them to the basement. Your grandmother was so organized, Aunt Linda said. She labeled everything. The journal boxes are in the corner. They found 5 cardboard boxes, each labeled journals, with different year ranges. Susan quickly found the box covering 1987 to 1995. This should have more about Obama, she said. They thanked Aunt Linda and took the box back to Karoline's house. Inside were 20 leather-bound journals, similar to the one they had found in the attic. Let's start with 1988, Susan suggested. That's right after the last entry we read. Peter nodded and found the right journal. They sat on the living room couch as he began to read. February 3rd, 1988. Met with Barry today. He's applying to law schools. Wants to go to Harvard. Asked for my advice about his personal statement. Told him to be honest about who he really is, not who he thinks they want him to be. He laughed and said that's why he values our friendship. I'm the only one who knows both versions of Barack Obama. Susan leaned forward. Both versions? What does that mean? Peter continued reading. According to Karoline's journals, she and Obama stayed in touch even after he left Chicago for Harvard. He would call her occasionally, and they would meet whenever. He visited Chicago. In one entry from 1990, Karoline wrote, Barry called from Cambridge today. He's been elected president of the Harvard Law Review, first black president in its history. I'm proud of him. When he called, he said, I wouldn't be here without you, Karoline. I asked if he meant because I didn't publish what I knew. He said, no, because you made me face myself. As they read through more journals, a clearer picture emerged. Karoline and Obama had developed a deep friendship based on mutual respect. She had become a mentor to him, someone he trusted with his doubts and fears. October 15, 1992. Barry visited Chicago this weekend. He's finishing law school soon. Talked about his plans, might go into politics someday. I asked if he's worried about what I know. He said he's not the same person anymore, that everyone has a past they're not proud of. True enough, but most people don't run for office. Susan looked at Peter. What exactly did Grandma know? She keeps hinting at it, but never says outright. Let's keep reading, Peter said. Maybe she explains it later. They spent hours going through the journals. They learned that Karoline had continued meeting with Obama throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. She documented his work as a civil rights attorney, his time teaching at the University of Chicago, and his first political campaigns. In a 2004 entry after Obama's famous speech at the Democratic National Convention, Karoline wrote, Watched Barry's speech on TV tonight. The whole country is talking about him now. They see what I saw all those years ago. The charisma, the intelligence, the way he bridges different worlds. But they don't know what I know. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice keeping his secret. But then I remember our conversations, how he grew from them. Some truths heal better in private. Susan rubbed her eyes. I still don't understand what this big secret is. Peter shrugged. Maybe it's not one big thing. Maybe it's lots of small inconsistencies that would have looked bad if they came out all at once, especially when he was young and just starting out. They took a break for lunch, ordering pizza. While they ate, Susan searched online for information about Karoline and Obama. She found nothing suggesting they knew each other. There were no photos of them together online, no mentions in any articles about Obama's early life. Grandma really did keep this relationship private, Susan said. There's nothing about it anywhere. After lunch, they returned to the journals. The entries became less frequent after 2005, when Obama became a U.S. Senator. But there was one significant entry from 2007, when he announced his campaign for president, March 10, 2007. Barry came to see me today. Very secretive visit. No staff, No security detail, just him. We sat in my kitchen like old times. He's running for president. Actually has a chance of winning. He asked me directly if I still had all my notes and recordings from our early conversations. I do. He didn't ask me to destroy them, and I wouldn't have if he did. But he wanted to know if I ever planned to share them. I told him some things matter more than headlines. He hugged me before he left, said, "You saw me at my worst and helped me become my best." Maybe that's enough. Susan sat back, surprised. Recordings? Grandma had recordings of their conversations? Peter looked equally shocked. She never mentioned recordings before. Where would they be? They searched through the remaining journals but found no mention of where Karoline might have kept the recordings. They did find entries from 2008 and 2009 during Obama's presidential campaign and first year in office, November 4, 2008. Barry won. President of the United States. Watched the election results alone. Cried when they announced it. Thinking about that young man I met in Chicago, so uncertain of who he was. Now, he's making history. My phone rang at midnight, it was him. Just said, "Thank you, Karoline." I said, "I'm proud of you, Mr. President." He laughed and said, "It's still Barry to you." The last entry about Obama was from 2016, near the end of his presidency. January 20th, 2016. Package arrived today. White House seal. Inside was a handwritten letter from Barry and a photo of us from 1987. His letter said, "As my time in office comes to an end, I've been thinking about beginnings. You were there at the beginning of my journey. You could have ended it before. It started, but instead you helped me find my true self. Some debts can never be repaid. With eternal gratitude, Barry." I put the letter and photo in my special box. Some stories aren't meant for memoirs or history books. Susan looked at Peter. The special box. What special box? Peter shook his head. I don't know. Did Grandma have a safe deposit box, maybe? Not that I know of, Susan replied. But she must have kept important things somewhere. They searched the house again, looking in closets, under floorboards, behind picture frames. Finally, in Karoline's bedroom, Susan noticed something odd about the wooden jewelry box on the dresser. The bottom seemed thicker than it should be. She carefully removed all the jewelry, then pressed on different parts of the box's interior. With a soft click, a hidden compartment opened in the bottom. Inside was a small USB drive, a key, and an envelope with, "For my family, open only after my death," written on it. Susan's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope. "Should we open it?" Peter nodded. "Grandma's been gone for 2 months. I think it's time." Susan carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a letter written in Karoline's neat handwriting. As she began to read, her heart raced with anticipation. "Dear family," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you found this letter, you've also found my hidden box and probably my journals, which means you now know about my friendship with Barack Obama." Susan and Peter looked at each other, eyes wide. The letter promised to reveal the full truth about what Karoline had discovered all those years ago, and why she had chosen to keep it secret for decades. Susan's hands shook as she held her grandmother's letter. Peter moved closer on the couch so he could read it too. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows as they began to read Karoline's final message. "Dear family, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you found this letter, you've also found my hidden box and probably my journals, which means you now know about my friendship with Barack Obama. This is a story I never told anyone while I was alive. Not because I was ashamed, but because I made a promise. A promise not based on fear or secrecy, but on understanding and compassion. I met Barack Obama, he went by Barry then, in 1987, when I was working on a story about community organizers in Chicago. He was young, just 25 years old, but there was something special about him. He had a way of listening that made people trust him. As a journalist, I always dug deeper than most. It was my job to find the real story behind the story. So I started researching this young man. What I discovered surprised me. There were inconsistencies in the stories he told about himself. Nothing criminal, Nothing terrible, but his narratives didn't always match the facts. He talked about his father as if they had a relationship, but records showed his father had only visited him once when he was 10 years old. He spoke about his time in Indonesia in different ways to different people. He shaped his identity depending on who he was talking to. The USB drive contains my recordings of our conversations from that time. The key opens a safe deposit box at First Chicago Bank, box number 247. Inside are all my original notes and documents. But here's what matters most. When I confronted Barack with what I had found, I expected denial. Instead, he showed me something rare, genuine growth. He admitted that he had been struggling with his identity. A mixed-race child, abandoned by his father, raised in different cultures. He had been trying to find himself by creating narratives that helped him belong. What started as an investigation became a friendship that lasted decades. I watched him grow from an uncertain young man into someone who embraced his complicated truth. He stopped hiding behind carefully crafted stories and found strength in his real journey. I could have written an exposé back then. It might have made my career. But I saw something more valuable than a headline. I saw a human being wrestling with the same questions we all face. Who am I? Where do I belong? I'm not writing this to protect his reputation. I'm writing this to explain my choice. Sometimes a journalist's highest calling isn't to publish the truth, but to recognize when that truth is still evolving. Whatever you decide to do with this information is now your choice. I trust you will make it wisely. With all my love, Karoline, Susan, lowered the letter to her lap. Peter sat back, his expression thoughtful. Wow, he said quietly. Not exactly the scandal I was expecting. Susan nodded. Me neither. I thought she had uncovered some terrible secret, but it was just him figuring out who he was. Still, Peter said, if this had come out during his presidential campaign, it could have hurt him. People might have called him a liar. Susan picked up the USB drive. Should we look at this? Peter hesitated. I'm not sure. Grandma said it was our choice now. Susan thought for a moment. I want to hear his voice. I want to understand what happened between them. They went to Karoline's old computer in the study and plugged in the USB drive. It contained dozens of audio files, each labeled with a date from 1987 and 1988. Susan clicked on the first one, dated February 15th, 1987. Karoline's voice came through the speakers. This is Karoline Miller, February 15th, 1987. Interview with Barack Obama, community organizer. Then a young man's voice. It's Barry, please. Only my father goes by Barack. They listened to several recordings. In the early ones, Obama spoke confidently about his childhood, his father's role in his life, his time in Indonesia. His voice was already compelling even then. Then they found a recording labeled Confrontation, May 17, 1987. Susan clicked on it, Karoline's voice. I've been doing some research, Barry. Some things don't add up. A long pause, then Obama. What do you mean? Karoline. Your father. You talk about him like you knew him well. But he only visited you once when you were 10. He left when you were 2 years old. Another pause. Obama. How did you find that out? Karoline. I'm a journalist. It's what I do. They heard a sigh, then Obama speaking more quietly. Sometimes I tell people what they want to hear, or maybe what I wish was true. Karoline. Why? Obama. Do you know what it's like to not fit anywhere? Too black for the white kids, too white for the black kids. My father was a ghost, my mother was a dreamer. I spent my childhood bouncing between worlds. The recording continued for almost an hour. They listened as the young Obama opened up about his struggles with identity, about creating versions of himself that would be accepted in different circles. Karoline's voice was firm but kind. You can't build a life on stories that aren't true, Barry. Sooner or later, the real you has to stand up. Obama. Maybe I don't know who the real me is yet. Karoline. That's okay. but you have to stop pretending you do. Susan and Peter listened to more recordings. They heard the relationship between Karoline and Obama change over time. The later conversations were warmer, more like friends than journalist and subject. In the final recording, dated December 24th, 1988, Obama called Karoline to wish her Merry Christmas before he left for Harvard Law School. Obama: I got accepted to Harvard Law. Karoline: congratulations. That's wonderful news. Obama: I wanted to thank you, Karoline. Karoline: for what? Obama: for calling me out last year, for making me face myself. I've stopped running from who I am. I've stopped making up stories to fit in. It's freeing. Karoline: I'm proud of you, Barry. Obama: will you ever write about what you found? About me? A pause. Karoline: no. Some stories aren't meant to be shared. Some truths matter more in private than in public. Obama: thank you, I won't forget this. The recording ended. Susan turned to Peter, her eyes wet with tears. She really cared about him, she said, and he trusted her. Peter nodded. So what do we do now? The letter, the recordings, the safe deposit box. Grandma left it all to us to decide. Susan thought about it. There's still one more step we need to take. We need to see what's in that safe deposit box. The next morning, they went to First Chicago Bank. Susan showed her ID and Karoline's death certificate. The bank manager led them to the vault and used Karoline's key to open box 247. Inside were folders filled with newspaper clippings, notes, and documents. Most were about Obama's early life. There were copies of school records, interviews with people who knew him in Hawaii and Indonesia, and Karoline's detailed notes about discrepancies she had found. One folder was labeled Final Decision. Inside was a draft of an article Karoline had written but never published. The headline read, "The Making of Barack Obama, Fact and Fiction in the Life of a Community Organizer." She wrote the story, Peter said, surprised. She just never published. As Susan read the first paragraph aloud. Like many young men, Barack Obama is still creating himself. The stories he tells about his life don't always match the facts, but unlike most young men, Obama has a rare gift for connecting with people across divides. Whether he's creating a persona or finding his true self remains to be seen. Peter took the article from her. This could have changed everything for him. If she had published this back then, Susan nodded, he might never have become president. They carefully packed everything back into the safe deposit box. As they left the bank, Susan asked, "So what do we do now? Do we contact Obama? Do we make this public?" Peter didn't answer right away. They walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench. Finally, he said, "Grandma could have gone public with this at any time. During his Senate campaign, his presidential campaigns, she chose not to. I think we should respect that choice." Susan wasn't sure. "But don't people have a right to know?" "Know what?" Peter asked. "That a young man in his 20s was struggling with his identity? That he sometimes exaggerated or changed his story? Is that really news?" Susan thought about the recordings they had heard, about the young man trying to find himself and the wise journalist who had chosen compassion over headlines. "You're right," she said finally. "Grandma made her choice for a reason, but I still think we should contact him. Let him know we found everything, and that her secret is safe with us." Peter smiled. "That sounds like a plan. How do you contact a former president?" Susan laughed. "I have no idea, but I'm sure we'll figure it out." As they walked back to the car, Susan felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had discovered a side of her grandmother she never knew, a woman who chose kindness over career, who saw the potential in a young man before anyone else did. Whatever happened next, Susan was proud to be Karoline Miller's granddaughter. 2 weeks passed since Susan and Peter discovered the safe deposit box. They had returned to their normal lives, Susan teaching at the elementary school, Peter working at the library. But thoughts of their grandmother's secret relationship with Obama never left their minds. They met for dinner at Susan's apartment on a Friday evening. Rain tapped against the windows as they ate pizza and discussed what to do next. "I've been thinking," Susan said, wiping her hands on a napkin. "We should try to contact him." Peter nodded. "I agree, but how? It's not like we can just call the White House anymore." "I did some research," Susan said. She pulled out her laptop and opened it. "Former presidents have offices paid for by the government. They have staff that handles their correspondence." She turned the screen to show Peter a website with contact information for the office of Barack Obama. "You think he'll actually see a letter from us?" Peter asked doubtfully. "Probably not," Susan admitted. "But we have to try. We could mention Grandma's name and some details only he would know." They spent the next hour drafting a letter. They kept it simple, explaining who they were, that Karoline had passed away, and that they had found her journals, recordings, and the safe deposit box. They mentioned the photo with "Barry and me, the truth stays between us," written on the back. They assured him they had no intention of making anything public but would like to speak with him if possible. "Do you think he'll respond?" Peter asked as Susan sealed the envelope. She shrugged. "I don't know. But Grandma was important to him. Maybe he'll want to talk about her." Susan mailed the letter the next morning. Then they waited. 3 weeks passed with no response. Susan tried not to feel disappointed. He was a former president, after all. He probably received thousands of letters. Then on a Tuesday evening, Susan's phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number. "Hello?" she answered. "Is this Susan Miller?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, it is. Please hold for President Obama." Susan nearly dropped her phone. She sat down quickly on her couch, her heart racing. "Hello, Susan." The voice was instantly recognizable. "This is Barack Obama." "Mr. President," Susan stammered. "Thank you for calling." "I received your letter about Karoline," he said. "I was very sorry to hear of her passing. She was a remarkable woman." "Yes, she was," Susan agreed, still stunned that she was speaking to him. "Your letter mentioned that you found her journals and recordings," Obama continued. "I have to admit, that got my attention." "We found everything," Susan said. "The photos, the journals, the USB drive with your conversations, the safe deposit box with her notes and the article she never published." There was a pause. "I see," Obama said finally. "And what do you plan to do with all that?" "Nothing," Susan said quickly. "That's why I wrote to you. We wanted you to know that we respect our grandmother's decision. She kept your secret all these years, and so will we." Another pause, longer this time. "I appreciate that," Obama said, his voice softer now. "Karoline was. She was important to me. She saw me at a time in my life when I wasn't sure who I was yet. She could have written a story that would have changed my path, but she chose not to." "We heard the recording," Susan said. "The one where she confronted you about the inconsistencies she found." "Ah," Obama said. He sounded slightly embarrassed. "That was a difficult conversation, but an important one." "She helped you," Susan said. "More than you know," Obama replied. "Listen, I'm going to be in Chicago next month for a foundation event. Would you and your cousin be willing to meet with me? I'd like to see what Karoline left behind, and I'd like to tell you about her from my perspective." Susan could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Yes, of course, we'd be honored." "Good," Obama said. "My staff will be in touch with the details. And Susan, thank you for reaching out. Karoline would be proud of how you're handling this." After they hung up, Susan called Peter immediately. "You won't believe who just called me," she said when he answered. "Who?" "Barack Obama." Peter was silent for a moment. "You're joking." "I'm not," Susan said. "He got our letter. He wants to meet with us when he's in Chicago next month." "Wow," Peter said. "What did he sound like?" Susan laughed. "Like himself. But more relaxed, I guess. Not so presidential. He really cared about Grandma, you can tell." Over the next few weeks, they prepared for the meeting. They organized all of Karoline's materials, the journals, photos, recordings, and documents from the safe deposit box. Susan received an email from Obama's chief of staff with details about the meeting. It would take place at a private room in a Chicago hotel where the former president would be staying. When the day arrived, Susan and Peter dressed in their best clothes. They were nervous as they rode the elevator up to the hotel suite. A Secret Service agent checked their IDs, then showed them into a comfortable sitting room where Obama was waiting. He stood as they entered, smiling warmly. He looked older than he had during his presidency, his hair grayer, but his smile was the same. "Susan, Peter, thank you for coming," he said, shaking their hands. "Please sit down." They sat on a couch across from him. Susan placed the box of materials on the coffee table between them. "We brought everything," she said. Obama nodded, looking at the box. "Before we get to that, I'd like to talk about your grandmother. She was a special person in my life." "We'd like to hear about that," Peter said. Obama settled back in his chair. "I met Karoline when I was just a community organizer. Nobody important. She was working on a story about community organizing in Chicago, and I was one of the people she interviewed." He smiled at the memory. Most journalists asked predictable questions, then moved on. Not Karoline. She stayed. She watched. She listened. And she started digging into my background. "She found inconsistencies," Susan said. Obama nodded. "Yes, I was. Well, I was still figuring out who I was. My background was complicated. Born in Hawaii, lived in Indonesia, my father from Kenya, my mother from Kansas. I didn't always know where I fit in." He leaned forward. "Sometimes I would emphasize different parts of my story depending on who I was talking to. Nothing fake exactly, but selective. Karoline caught me doing it." "She confronted you," Peter said. "She did," Obama confirmed. "It was terrifying, honestly. Here was this respected journalist who had basically caught me changing my story. I thought she was going to write an expose that would end my career before it even started." "But she didn't," Susan said. "No, she didn't," Obama agreed. "Instead, she challenged me to be honest, not just with others but with myself. She said I would never find my true voice if I kept speaking in different voices to different people." He looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. "It was the best advice anyone ever gave me. It changed how I saw myself. I stopped trying to be who I thought others wanted me to be. I started figuring out who I actually was." "She kept in touch with you," Peter said. "All through your career?" Obama nodded. "She did. Not often, but at important moments. She became a kind of moral compass for me. Someone who knew me before politics, before law school, before everything. Someone who had seen through me once and wouldn't hesitate to do it again if necessary." Susan opened the box and took out the folder with the unpublished article. She wrote this but never published it. Obama took the folder carefully. He opened it and read the first paragraph. A complex expression crossed his face: sadness, relief, gratitude. "She could have published this," he said quietly. "Back then, or during my Senate campaign, or when I ran for president. It wouldn't have destroyed me, but it would have hurt. It would have changed how people saw me." "Why do you think she didn't?" Susan asked. Obama closed the folder and handed it back. "You'd have to ask her that. But I think she saw something in me worth protecting. Not my reputation, but my growth. She understood that we all need space to become ourselves." He looked at Susan and Peter. "Your grandmother had a rare quality. She knew when truth should be public and when it should be private. As a journalist, her instinct was to publish. But as a human being, she chose compassion." They talked for another hour. Obama shared stories about Karoline that they had never heard. He told them about calling her the night he won the presidency, and about sending her a letter and photo as his time in office was ending. Finally, he looked at the box of materials. "What do you plan to do with all this?" Susan and Peter exchanged glances. "We don't know yet," Susan admitted. "What do you think we should do?" Obama considered the question. "That's not for me to decide. Karoline left these things to you. She trusted your judgment. He paused, then added, "Whatever you decide, I'm grateful that you reached out. It means a lot to know that Karoline's family understands what she meant to me and what I meant to her." As they prepared to leave, Obama shook their hands again. "Your grandmother changed my life," he said. "I hope you know that." Susan nodded, feeling tears in her eyes. "I think we're beginning to understand." The meeting with Obama changed something in Susan and Peter. As they left the hotel and walked through the busy Chicago streets, they felt different. They had seen a side of their grandmother they never knew existed. They had spoken with a former president about how she had shaped his life. It was a lot to process. "What do we do now?" Peter asked as they sat in a coffee shop afterward. Susan stirred her coffee slowly. "I've been thinking about that. Grandma kept all this private for a reason, but she also saved everything and left it for us to find." "You think she wanted us to do something with it?" Peter asked. "Maybe," Susan said. "Not expose Obama, obviously. But maybe there's something else we're meant to do with this story." They spent the next week going through all the materials again. The journals, recordings, photos, and documents. They weren't looking for secrets about Obama anymore. They were trying to understand their grandmother better. "Listen to this," Susan said one evening. They were sitting in Karoline's living room surrounded by her journals. "October 10th, 1995. Had lunch with Barry today. He's teaching law now at University of Chicago. Asked him if he still thinks about our conversations from years ago. He said, 'Every day. You taught me that authenticity matters more than approval.' Maybe that's the real story here, not the inconsistencies I found, but the journey toward truth." Peter nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like a journalist trying to figure out what the real story is." "Exactly," Susan said. "Grandma was always looking for the deeper truth, not just facts, but what they meant." As they continued reading, a pattern emerged. Karoline had used her relationship with Obama to reflect on her own career and choices. She had written extensively about journalistic ethics, about when to publish and when to hold back, about the human cost of expose journalism. In Sci-Fi, a journal from 2009, she wrote, "Watched Barry's inauguration today, first black president. I remember the young man struggling with his identity, and now he stands as a symbol for millions. Some would say I failed as a journalist by not reporting what I found. But perhaps my greatest success as a journalist was knowing when the story wasn't ready to be told." "I think I understand now," Susan said. Grandma wasn't just protecting Obama. She was exploring a different kind of journalism, one that valued growth over gotcha moments. "So what do we do with that insight?" Peter asked. Susan was quiet for a moment. "I have an idea," she said finally. The next day, Susan called the journalism department at Northwestern University. She explained that her grandmother, Karoline Miller, had been a journalist for over 40 years and had left behind extensive journals about journalistic ethics. She asked if they would be interested in creating a scholarship in Karoline's name. The department chair was excited about the idea. Karoline Miller was still remembered and respected in Chicago journalism circles. A scholarship in her name would be meaningful. Susan and Peter worked out the details over the next month. They would sell Karoline's house and use part of the money to fund the Karoline Miller Scholarship for Ethical Journalism. The scholarship would support students who demonstrated a commitment to thoughtful, ethical reporting. As part of the scholarship announcement, they would donate selected journals and writings from Karoline to the university's archives, carefully edited to remove specific references to Obama while preserving her thoughts on journalistic ethics. "What about all the Obama materials?" Peter asked. "The recordings, the unpublished article, the photos." Susan thought about it. "We should give them back to him. They're part of his story, too." They contacted Obama's office and arranged to send him the box of materials. Susan included a letter explaining their plans for the scholarship and asking for his blessing to use some of Karoline's writings about journalistic ethics in the university archives. A week later, Susan received a call from Obama. "I got your package," and he said. And your letter about the scholarship. I think it's a wonderful idea. Karoline would be proud. Thank you, Susan said. We wanted to honor her legacy in the right way. About the materials you sent, Obama continued. I've been going through them. It's strange to hear my younger self to read her thoughts about me, but I'm grateful to have them. We thought they belonged with you, Susan said. I appreciate that, Obama said. But I've been thinking, these recordings and notes, they tell an important story about growth, about mentorship, about ethical choices. Not just my story or Karoline's, but a universal one. What are you suggesting? Susan asked. What if we found a way to share parts of this story? Not now, but someday. Not the personal details that Karoline protected, but the larger lessons. About how a young person finds their authentic voice, about how a journalist chooses compassion over headlines. Susan was surprised. You'd be okay with that? With the right framing, yes, Obama said. Maybe as part of the scholarship program. Maybe years from now when more perspective is possible. But I think there's something valuable here that shouldn't be lost. They talked for another half hour, exploring possibilities. By the end of the call, they had the beginnings of a plan. Obama would keep the materials for now. In the future, when the time felt right, they would work together to share the story of Karoline and Barry in a way that honored both of them and offered lessons for future journalists and public servants. 6 months later, Susan and Peter stood on a stage at Northwestern University. It was the formal announcement of the Karoline Miller Scholarship for Ethical Journalism. The room was filled with journalism students, professors, and local reporters who had known Karoline. Susan approached the microphone. Our grandmother, Karoline Miller, was a journalist who believed that the truth is sacred, but how and when we tell it matters just as much as the facts themselves. Peter joined her at the podium. She understood that sometimes the most important stories are the ones that unfold slowly, that need time and space to develop. She knew when to hold back and when to push forward. Susan continued, This scholarship honors a woman who saw journalism not just as reporting facts, but as serving humanity, who understood that sometimes the greatest service a journalist can offer is patience, allowing people the space to grow into their best selves. In the back of the room, a tall man with gray hair slipped in quietly. Few people noticed him at first. But as word spread that former President Barack Obama was in attendance, a buzz went through the crowd. After the formal presentation, Obama joined Susan and Peter on stage. Flashbulbs popped as photographers captured the moment. Questions flew from the audience. Why was the former president at a scholarship announcement for a journalist? Obama stepped to the microphone. Karoline Miller was a mentor to me long before I entered public life. She taught me the value of authenticity and the importance of being truthful with myself before I could be truthful with others. This scholarship is a fitting tribute to a remarkable woman who understood that the truth isn't just about facts, it's about wisdom, timing, and compassion. Later, as they shared refreshments with the crowd, a young journalism student approached Susan. Ms. Miller, is it true that your grandmother knew President Obama when he was young? Did she really have some kind of secret about him that she never published? Susan smiled. My grandmother believed that the most important stories are the ones that transform us. Sometimes those stories need to be shared with the world, and sometimes they need to be held close until the time is right to tell them. The student looked confused, but Susan just smiled. Someday, the full story of Karoline and Barry would be told. But not yet. For now, their grandmother's legacy would live on in a scholarship that challenged young journalists to think deeply about when to publish and when to wait, when to expose and when to protect. As Susan looked across the room at Obama talking with Peter, she felt a sense of peace. Their grandmother had made the right choice all those years ago, and now they had made the right choice too. The truth about Obama and Karoline wasn't a scandal to be exposed. It was a story of growth, mentorship, and ethical choices that would inspire generations of journalists to come.